right, let's talk about my favorite books I read this winter. So these are books I read in January, February, and March of 2015. Let's start with the honorable mentions category. These are books that I reread this winter, and they all still stood up to the test of time. First, there was Stardust. I've read this thing 3 times now, and it's still just adorable. It's Neil Gaiman writing fairy tale, and each time I read it a bit differently. Second honorable mention is Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. True confession time. I didn't really like this one the first time around, but I liked it a lot better on this read-through. It's definitely a grittier book than the first book, which threw me for a loop the first time around that I read this one. But as I've read the rest of the books and loved the gritty, that was no longer an issue for me, and I could just enjoy the Harry Potter-ness of the whole thing. Alright, on to the books I read for the first time this winter that I loved. These weren't all published in 2015, though a couple were. I just read all these for the first time in 2015. At number 7, let's start with a tribute to my obsession with paranormal romance this winter, and that is Afterglow, the second book in Jane Castle's sci-fi paranormal romance harmony series. This is kind of the second part of a 2-book duology continuing the story of a paranormal archaeologist, yes, paranormal archaeologist, who's dating essentially an ex-mob boss. Plus, there are dust bunnies in these stories, and I'm kind of gaga over dust bunnies. I like this entire series, really. At number 6 is Unraveled by Courtney Milan. I've been off historical romance for a while. It's just too cliche and human for me right now. I decided to dip my toe back in with a Courtney Milan book, and it was wonderful. It's about an upright magistrate and the woman whose job it is to be a false witness to free defendants for a crime boss. This was adorable and full of personality. Now, this doesn't mean I'm back on historical romance, because then I tried a historical romance by a different author, and it was too cliche and He-Man again. But I think this just means I'm back on Courtney Milan. At number 5, we have our tribute to the contemporary romance category with A Single Kiss by Grace Burrows. I've read some historical romance by her in the past, and the result was conflicting. Some I hated, some I liked, but this was the first contemporary romance of hers that I read, and I loved it. It's about a single mother who gets a job in corporate law, but first must pay her dues in the dreaded family law department. The characters in this were just engaging, and I enjoyed every minute of this book. Okay, let's talk new adult. Courtney Milan, also mentioned earlier at number 6, decided to try her hand at new adult, and the result makes it to number 4 on my list. It's called Trade Me. The result, on one hand, is a bit of a everything including the kitchen sink approach to new adult, and while this makes the whole thing a bit over the top, I don't care, as I love the melodrama in this one. It felt very Abby Glines to me, plus it deals with some issues from the male point of view that you don't see addressed very often, so I was decidedly pleased with the whole thing. Moving into the top 3, we have A Darker Shade of Magic, V.E. Schwab's new fantasy book that we've been seeing everywhere on BookTube, and it's just lovely. I actually found the first half of this a bit slow, but it was kind of necessary world building. The second half was just a masterclass in the spare, crisp imagery that I've come to expect from V.E. Schwab. Her writing is just a balm to my soul. I'm not going to synopsize this book. You've heard about this book a gazillion times on BookTube. I'll just say the hype is true, it's good. Continuing on in my Rainbow Rowell reading journey, at number 2 is Eleanor Park. A young adult book so heart-wrenchingly beautiful, it's kinda an instant classic. I really can't say too much about this book because you kinda just have to read it. Read it all the way to the end because it has one of the best last paragraphs of any book ever. Alright, my number 1 book of winter 2015 is actually a series. A series which I read the entire thing in like 2 weeks. I got up, I read it, went to work, read more at lunch, came home, read some more, repeat. This was Anne Bishop's The Others urban fantasy series, which starts with Vision in red. First of all, this is urban fantasy. There's no explicit romance, so it is not really paranormal romance. So if that stuff kind of makes you blush, you don't have to worry about that here. The world building, the characters, the intense emotions Anne Bishop elicits, this series is just all around perfect. I can't really describe it. Read it. The 3rd book just came out, so you can binge on all 3 right now. Okay, What were your favorite books you read this winter?